To be honest with you, I'm afraid of rain and never leave the house when it's pouring outside. However, I should give myself credit because I wasn't always like this. I used to enjoy watching the rain outside the windows, but now I always have my curtains drawn tightly across the windowsill's edges. I wish I could explain what made me this way. I can't tell you my experience as if it were some kind of fantasy, as if it were just another strange story that should be forgotten in a week. If you see it that way, then that's okay, but I won't forget. In 2012, I'll never forget. I spent my childhood wandering up and down tree lines and dreaming of fantastic monsters and mythical creatures. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student who was completely enamored with nature and all things wild. I was studying forestry as an adult with aspirations of defending those tree lines and fantasies. As a hiker, I was thrilled when my professor proposed that we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along trails and paths to remind ourselves of why we were doing what we were doing. I knew of a hiking trail a few hours outside of our town that offered plenty of room to walk with very little crowding. The only people who really walked longer than a few minutes down the trail with the park rangers were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one of them on the ever-winding and expanding trails of the forest seemed slim. "Hey Lily, would you want to go down to the preserve with me?" I asked as the bell rang out, marking the end of the school day. Lily was a quiet and kind girl with gentle green eyes and long brunette hair that fell just past her shoulders. She was the kind of person that people admired from a distance because she was quiet but beautiful. She would smile at a joke or compliment, but she would hardly ever respond, which made me want to be closer to her. We had been friends for a while, and I couldn't say that we had romantic intentions. I just knew that we clicked on some level. Of course, just tell me when she looked into my eyes with a gentle smile on her face. I smiled back at her, hoping this trip would be successful. Lily and I spent our free time shopping for food supplies and tents together. Before long, we were all packed and prepared to leave. We loaded our bags onto the roof of my small car and drove a few hours east on the highway. By the time we arrived, it was mid-afternoon, so there was still plenty of time for a walk, but it was difficult to find parking because so many people were there with their dogs, preparing lunches, and strolling the paths. I assumed you meant it to be silent. When Lily asked, I rolled my eyes and said, "I'm sure these kids aren't planning on hiking a few days in. It'll get quiet, I promise." I then went around and started removing our big packs from the vehicle's roof because, despite their size, they were surprisingly easy to carry. Lily put the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to start walking towards the park. As we got closer to the trail's entrance, we noticed a Rain angrily standing guard. He asked, "Yeah, that's all right." His tone was neither hostile nor cautious. "If you need anything, call down to the station. There are a few ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them if you need to, just make sure to clean up." I asked the fit middle-aged man, "Of course, just let me know your names and take my card." The ranger smiled warmly and gave me a small business card for the local ranger station. "Thank you." "Oh, my name is Max." "This is Lily." Lily nodded to the ranger, and he nodded back respectfully. "Well, Max and Lily, have fun out there. We'll be patrolling, so don't be afraid to say hello if you see us." With those words, the ranger retreated from the entrance, and we started our journey. We spent half of the first day walking slowly and quietly in gratitude. There's something so freeing about walking without a time limit. It's like all the stress in the world just falls off your back, and you are the only thing that matters at that precise moment. Just stay away from snakes and odd plants, and you'll be okay without any bills, studies, or worries. Shortly after we started our journey, the sun started to set behind the trees, and the warm but steadily cooling late afternoon wind started sweeping beneath our sweaty clothes. Lily said, let's find a clearing to settle into, before I nodded in agreement and noticed a small opening farther down the path that was obviously made by others who had made a similar trip. It only took a few minutes to set up our tents in the clearing and light a small fire. After all that walking and hard work, we were finally ready to be off our feet for a while. Lily settled herself on the other side of the fire I was sitting at and pulled out a granola bar to eat. "This place is really beautiful," she said, taking a large bite out of the bar. "Yeah, I haven't seen many animals yet, but I unwrapped my food and put it on my lips, ready to take a bite." I quickly glanced over at Lily and froze in the darkening forest just behind her. I thought it must have been some sort of small critter, so I squinted my eyes in an attempt to focus on it, but whatever it was seemed to fade out of existence, going straight into the ground. I laughed and shook my head when Lily asked, realizing that it must have appeared as though I was staring at her with my mouth hanging open. Softly, I apologize. I thought I saw a small animal in the woods, possibly a rabbit or something else. It must have burrowed into the ground, and I knew that my friend would not see anything. Whatever it was gone as soon as I saw it, so we finished our meal, put out the fire, and went to our separate tents. I slept like a log, exhausted from all the walking. It wasn't until the morning that I woke up that I staggered out of the tent, almost tripping on the tiny fabric ledge at the entrance of my portable shelter. It was hot and humid. "Just so you know, I believe we should be on the lookout for snakes." The summer morning sun struck me like a ton of bricks. I heard something rubbing on the bottom of my tent last night. When I opened my eyes, I noticed that the indentations on my walls looked like a fairly thick snake trying to wriggle its way in. Lily didn't seem bothered by the potential late-night visitor, so I kept her warning in mind but continued on. As our journey progressed, we realized that every step we took was another blotch in the sky, somehow a storm was brewing overhead that none of the forecasts we watched warned us of how long it would rain. Lily was interrupted by a loud thunderclap in the clouds nearby. I felt the earth tremor before a few raindrops started to fall from the dimly lit sky. "Thank you, Lily," I said, arching my head in her direction. She scoffed, and I laughed. The rain was only a little drizzle at that point, but it was obvious that things would get worse, so let's hurry and find a place to set up. I watched as she gradually increased her pace, going from a walk to a jog, heading deeper down the trail. I followed her closely for a while, and although it seemed like we wouldn't find a clearing anytime soon, we were already on the verge of being considered undoubtedly drenched. Fortunately, right at that very moment, another powerful burst of thunder erupted from above, and this time the floodgates were opened. Rain started to fall deliberately and with enough force to erupt on impact, splashing everything nearby with the watery contents of the drop. "Hey, right over there," I heard Lily yell out, barely audible through the thunderous rain, as she was running off a main path down a small side trail. I looked in her direction and saw a small cabin nearby. I ran off the path with her, and as I increased my speed, more and more mud thrust itself against my legs. I tried to catch up to my light-footed friend, but something caught me off guard, and my momentum carried me downward, face first, into a mud bath for a few seconds. I was dazed and just lying down in the runny muck pit when I finally looked down and saw what appeared to be a thin tree root that was also covered in dirt protruding from the ground. However, as my eyes followed the path, those first assumptions vanished, and it was the shimmering of the mud that made me realize that whatever it was moving just beneath the mud. Then it dawned on me that it was one of the snakes Lilia had mentioned. I stumbled over one of them, feeling a chill go across my back. I jolted back up and continued on my path, leaving that snake behind me. I made it to the cabin doors and busted inside, finally free from the hurricane-like storm. Wow, a familiar voice rang out in the shack. When I turned over, I saw a clean but saturated Lily staring at me with a smile of amusement. She had decided to have a wrestling match outside, which I found humorous. I looked down at myself, and mud was dripping off of almost every part of my body. I took some time to look around the cabin as Lily pulled the towels free. It was wooden, old, and completely empty. There was a cooking stove off to one side, but other than that, it looked very sparse, obviously made for a quick one-night stay. I think I met one of your snakes you mentioned out there, so they decided to give me a little trip. Oh really? Lily said as she grabbed me and turned me around, searching the pack on my back for something to help me clean up. You're right, they're pretty thick, and I wonder what kind they are. I can't imagine them being venomous, being that wide. As Lily started arranging her belongings, I turned around again and she handed me a bundle of towels. I washed my face and brow right away because the dirt was already beginning to dry and adhere to my skin. Thank you. It looks awful outside, I said, as I pressed my pack against the door and moved to a window while still cleaning myself. I heard a little groan of acknowledgement from behind me, and I opened my eyes to see the rain continuing its assault on the planet, the dirt flowing like rivers down the valleys and trails, both natural and man-made. I was locked up on the trail over the forested wetland to the path we took to get up here when I noticed something sticking out from the ground like a small pillar right where I tripped. I tried unsuccessfully to clear the fog and obstructing rain from the inside of the window, but I could only just make out what appeared to be a thick, partially submerged branch that had broken off on one end, with small twigs splintering off skyward. Hey, come and look at this. I called to Lily, who was still scurrying around with her bags. Is that the snake? She asked, getting to her feet. It seems strange, but I don't think so. Watch the mud-coated object get hammered by rain as Lily approached and peered outside. Is that a broken tree route? She suggested. I could only shrug. Whatever it wasn't moving. Wait, Lily chimed in again. Look at the color. As more and more of the rain ran its way down the object, the less obstructed by mud the objects became. I narrowed my eyes, pushing past the raindrops on the window, and noticed exactly what Lily was talking about. Whatever was under that mud was a pale shade of gray. Oh my God, Lily gasped and grabbed her mouth. What is it? I turned and looked at her, my eyebrow upturned in confusion. Look at the end of it, she said, holding her breath. I turned my gaze back outward and focused, and I felt my heart arrow fingertips. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as the grave. Oh my God, my voice wavered slightly. We should call the rangers and get them out here. Where's their card? She asked, hand extended towards me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wet but legible business card. Without hesitation, Lily snatched it out of my hand and began dialing the number. She paced back and forth on the creaking cabin floorboards, and I would want to report anything on one of the routes. I turned and continued to stare at the terrified hand, its fingers stretched out in anticipation. I heard the voice on the other end of the phone chirping up, and Lily nodded. Hey Max, could you step outside and tell me what number is next to the door? She said, staring at the sky as she let the water rush over it. We're at I peeled my eyes away from the hand, feeling an increasingly oppressive air pressing its way inside the cabin. I dispelled my intuition and proceeded to the door, opened it, and went outside. Without the blurry window between us, I could see the arm more clearly. It was smooth and hairless, and the fingernails appeared neat and trimmed. The water that poured over it nearly disappeared as if it were a sponge, and I had to push my eyes away from it in order to see the number 17 on the wall. I took a deep breath and mentally repeated the number until a loud clap reverberated behind me, making me a little uneasy. I turned back to face the arm, but all I saw was mud racing down the trail. I swallowed hard and hurried back inside the number 17, but I believe the arm fell back into the mud and is no longer there. Lily's eyes widened as she told the dispatcher the information, and shortly after, she yanked the phone away from her ear and hung up. They advised us to remain where we were and warned that the storm would not be over anytime soon. They also said that a ranger was on their way and that the police had been notified, but it might take some time for them to get to us. I bit my lip and turned to face the empty path outside, hoping it wouldn't be dragged. I muttered, away by the current, and Lily appeared right next to me, joining me at the window. I'm sure they'll be able to follow that mud slick down to wherever it goes. Looking down at myself, I noticed that my clothes were still covered in mud, but the rain on my skin seemed to have washed away most of the dirt, she said reassuringly. After a few minutes of silence, we had our food spread out in front of us. We had decided that once the ranger arrived, our little expedition was over. We'd seen more than enough in the last 2 days than we could have in a lifetime. I said stoically, "Come on, Max, let's make ourselves at home. At least I'll just lock the door in case, well, you know." Her voice trailed off, "in case there's a killer out there." She walked over to the door, flipped the lock, and instead chose to continue her mission of getting set up. I mentioned cutting back on some extra food. As we prepared for bed, Lily nodded and joined in on the feast. I saw that my companion kept staring out at the darkening windows. It was a few hours into the night before I heard Lily's quiet voice. I could feel the tension in the air, but everything was fine. I asked Lily, and she shook her head dismissively. "I feel strange, like I'm being watched, but I'm sure it's nothing. But just to be safe," she tore off her pillowcase and then mine before going to the windows and covering the glass with them as makeshift curtains. I don't blame you. I went to my bedroll and caseless pillow before lying down in an attempt to get comfortable. Max, did you hear me wake up?" I opened my eyes less sleepy than I thought I would and looked directly at Lily, who was staring at the cabin's wooden door. I watched it for a few seconds before catching a glimpse of the handle jiggle, indicating that someone was attempting to enter. "What should we do?" Lily asked. Maybe it's the whispered conversation we were having, but then I heard a loud knocking from the other side of the wooden door and jumped to my feet. It must be the police. Every time I stepped back from the door and knelt down near the ground, the wooden frames of the tiny cabin rocked, and I watched as one of the pillowcase curtains started to slowly slip off the window sill. I started my slow, methodical walk to the door. "Who's out there?" Silence. "Hello," and I yelled again. Suddenly, the banging began again, loud enough to drown out my voice. The banging on the door stopped abruptly, and I carefully knelt down and grabbed the fabric in my hands to toss back over the window. Then, as the fabric fell and I was faced with the darkness outside, Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. Suddenly, the palm of a hand emerged from the darkness and slapped the window with a heavy force. I hurriedly threw the pillowcase back on the window and backed up to Lily, who was shivering and her eyes wide with horror that was the hand, although all I could see outside was the pale palm in the darkness. Max was the hand outside before, and I felt my heart sink. I put my arms around Lily for her comfort, and as the wet palm of a hand continued to smash against the glass, I could hear cracks beginning to spread throughout the window pane. As Lily bowled up, I held onto her and kept my eyes on the pillow face covering the glass, praying it wouldn't fall and see that dead arm once more. With a final thump, a light went out. Shone through the fabric of the window mere seconds after the attack halted, I could hear the struggling sounds of wheels rolling up towards the cabin. I let out a sigh and a prayer that the Rangers had finally made it, with the sounds of the wheels stopping just a few yards away. I finally heard a voice call out from the void outside, "Lily, Max, you in there?" The voice sounded familiar. It was the Ranger from the day prior. I slid to my feet, dragging Lily with me. "Yeah, we're inside, but someone's out there," I yelled. I rushed over to the door and opened it to see the Ranger standing stiff off in the middle of the small opening in front of the cabin. He was facing us, but the lights from his rover coupled with his hat covered his body in intense shadows. His body seemed rigid. "Come out of that box and we'll get you home," the Ranger said. His voice seemed different this time, disjointed from his body. I stayed quiet. Something was very wrong here. "Step out of there now," the voice grumbled, unrecognizable from earlier. "Are you all right? Can't you see my smile?" I called out a bit louder than a whisper. The Ranger's neck tipped back. I retreated further into the doorway and watched as two incredibly long fingers trailed their way from behind the ranger's head and made their way across his cheeks to his mouth. They slid inside with little resistance and started pulling his lips outward in a mockingly gruesome smile. Then they continued prying. I watched as his lips strained with the force of the fingers inside his mouth, turning white with the stress placed against them, before a shower of red erupted from his mouth, parting the centers of his lips like sliced meat. From directly behind the ranger, a deep, strange voice shouted out. I searched for the source and froze as I saw a human face half buried in the muck, its black, cold eyes staring at me from just close to the ranger's foot. I saw the ranger fall into the mud, and just behind his head, a long spider-like arm reached out of the ground, seemingly changing its size and shape as if it only vaguely obeyed the laws of this reality. This monster, which shone from an unidentified source, was a monster of the strictest definition. Its gaze was so far removed from humanity that there was no common ground between us. The ranger's body jerked and squirmed on the ground as more and more dead hands started to emerge from the mud and around his body. I was extremely thirsty, but now I'm extremely hungry. The submerged head shouted out to me without warning. The ranger's body was ripped under the earth and devoured by the mud. The ground where he was shifted and bubbled over like a small eruption. The creature's eyes stared at me with a deadening gaze. It was observing me. I let out a small chirp from my mouth without changing expression. The head effortlessly started gliding through the earth towards the cabin, fingers and arms popping out from the earth around it like fins from a shark. I'd stored enough courage to slam the door shut and lock it before running back over to Lily, who saw the whole thing. What is that? She asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head and slumped down next to her. I don't know. We sat in silence until the sounds of scratching came from below the floorboards. Hundreds of fingers tearing away flesh to the bone, trying to burrow their way upwardwards. All we could do was sit in the corner furthest away from the windows and pray they didn't get to us. That night we watched as the floors pulsated upwards and downwards as the foundation began to crumble. Those arms were going to drag us in our wooden coffin downwards into the earth. I didn't know what to do. I sat there as the floor cracked open and mud crept up through the seams of the boards like blood flowing from a vein. I sat waiting to die, but Lily had other plans. She took hold of my hand and jerked me to my feet. She looked at the door for a moment before running away with me on her toes and running in the direction of the ranger's car. We both jumped on its seat and zipped off the path back from where we came after Lou. The ranger never turned it off for us before the earth took him down. I dared to look back at the cabin, which was still partially submerged on a path a few yards away from us, but there was something else there as well. That unblinking head with its black eyes shone resolutely and without emotion during our escape. We drove for an unknown amount of time until we ran into some other rangers who were on a scouting mission. We told them everything we knew, but their disbelieving expressions told us enough, and we were classified as emotionally unstable and untrustworthy. Observes the powers that are mentioned every time it rains. I wonder if somewhere in the woods, a single head stares out on the trails, waiting for someone to pass by, or if there are a million hands waiting just below the surface to drag them down into the earth. The ranger's disappearance in the cabin was an accident caused by a mudslide.